So after reading What is So Punk About Snowboarding, there's a few things that really stood out to me. But before I get onto that, I would just basically sum up the article. The article really sums up the roots of snowboarding and where it came from in the aspect of its punk or rebellious youth culture. It stemmed from a culture of freedom and free thinking and creativity, really, the sport of snowboarding. But as the article explains, has really evolved into something much different. Although those alternative youth culture is still the main portrait of snowboarding, although it may not be actually true for the whole population of snowboarders. But reading through the article, I highlighted a few key things in here that really got me thinking, just mostly on my own experiences. First of all, they explain how skiing is a very traditional or was a very traditional sport. It had a set of rules and regulation and code of practice as well. And it got me thinking that with the influence of snowboarding and injecting snowboarding into the ski hills, did snowboarding in a sense kill skiing and kill the tradition of skiing? And I think you could argue that it did. Skiing isn't that upper class, Hollywood celebrities only can go do anymore, as they explained once was done. It is more, skiing and snowboarding has been opened up to anybody and everyone, and that I think really came in with the influence of snowboarding when the lower class, these youth that really wanted to express themselves on the ski hill came in and did that, and no longer the ski hills couldn't just cater to the high class and have really fancy resorts with high prices, hotels and things like that. That might still be there, but now they have to cater to everyone and younger youth culture, and they've been doing that for a couple decades now. So I think in a sense skiing did kind of lose some of its tradition, and it has changed from something that's very traditional, such as maybe looking at golf, how they're very traditional in their dress and conduct, into something that's a lot more free and creative because of the influence of snowboarding coming on the hills, and then the influence of snowboarding has had on the people that ski and maybe are just learning to ski now. In the article, it also explains about the dress of skiers and snowboarders, and I thought this was particularly interesting because I've only been snowboarding since I was about 17 years old, so less than a decade, really. And I'm new to the sport. I'm a young generation. I don't know what's happened in the past other than research that I've done in snowboarding films and word of mouth. But I know what I've seen. And in the article, they explain how skiers in the 1980s, especially in the 80s, would have very flashy clothing. They would have really tight clothing, and that was very colorful. And then the snowboarders would wear very baggy clothing, and that didn't have a lot of color in the clothing, and that was to kind of emulate, or it was a reflection of skaters in the streets, the urban skaters, that would just basically wear anything that they had and what they could afford, so it would be baggy and not very expensive kind of clothing, and that was the style on the ski hill. And then the skiers would wear these very tight, aerodynamic and expensive clothing. And you kind of had a mashup between the two styles on the ski hills when you were looking at both the groups together. But what I find is interesting is nowadays when you go out to the ski hills, you see the snowboarders wearing very, very bright colors. And the younger youth, they don't necessarily have to be snowboarders, but wearing very, very bright and flashy clothing. And that makes me to think maybe this is, with the decades going on and snowboarding being more accepted in the culture, this is actually maybe a merger between the skiers and the snowboarders, and there's a mixture of it. Just looking at my toque and everything there, you can just tell this is something that is obviously brought now into snowboarding today. So I thought that was interesting, and thought maybe there was just a little more of a breakdown between the lines between skiers and snowboarders with the emergence of new clothing. The article really focuses on how snowboarding has made a shift between being the rebellious youth into something that has been marketable and picked up by the media and also by companies. And I thought it was very interesting that in the article they actually explained in one section how a ski company, Santa Cruz, was mocking skiers at the time, and I believe this was in the early 90s. They were making fun of ski companies, and they made a really fat ski that kind of emulated more like a snowboard. So they were essentially like bigger than a normal ski, but smaller than a snowboard, and there was two of them, of course. And this idea was to just kind of a gag that they did, and they said that this was kind of like a patch for skiers that needed to come over and quit skiing and come on over to snowboarding. The funny thing is, and the company didn't know this at all, is that these skis actually sold very well. They weren't expecting it to. It was just kind of more of a joke, and they sold more than 1,000 pairs that season in making those skis. And it was very interesting. They said that, you know, sometimes gags backfire, and they quote in the article that the ski companies were actually very angry that these snowboarding companies were starting now to make skis, and they were actually selling very well, because the ski companies, they were already making snowboards and selling those, but they didn't want to lose that power that they had. And they were losing that power when this company, Santa Cruz, made the skis, and they were selling very well. So I thought that was a very interesting little excerpt in the article, and it kind of showed that, you know, the roots of snowboarding, you know, originating from rebellious youth, kind of upset even later in the mid-90s with the companies kind of having the rebellious kind of feeling to it, and upsetting the power to be, or the major power, and that was the big ski companies. So I thought that was very interesting. In the article, they also kind of single out that language between snowboarders and skiers was different, and I find that in the article they point out a few words and things like that, and obviously these are words that I'm very familiar with and that I can you know, relate with right away. Because I'm in the snowboarding culture. But what I find about this is that all this language here that is used in here, such as you know, pow and going fakie or switch or doing a hit or bonking off to something, is language that you would find now not only with snowboarders, but any youth or younger generations that are out there riding on the ski hills. So I would have to say there's a huge crossover and merger with this language that has just kind of seeped its way in, not just from the snowboarding side, but even into the skiing side as well, to the point that, you know, everybody knows this language. And that could be from a variety of influences, just, you know, riding with your friends. You know, you're often riding with a mixture of people, skiers or snowboarders, and of course magazines and media, you would hear terms like this, of course. So I think it's neat to see that language has really come in. And with that, the article points out that the clothing, which I talked about before, equipment and language really was kind of some of the major factors that distinguished snowboarders away from skiers. But, you know, in the last 5 years, I would have to say that they have really come together between the skiers and snowboarders on the ski hill. And you can really recognize a lot of similarities in all these three criteria here, and that doesn't leave a lot of